September 10th, 1940. 11,000 feet above the chalky cliffs of Dover, Hauptmann Werner Milders squeezed his Messerschmitt 109's trigger and watched his cannon shells arc uselessly behind the British fighter that had just turned inside his attack arc. Again, the Spitfire banked sharply left, its elliptical wings catching the morning sun like polished silver. Milders, Germany's top fighter ace with 43 victories, felt something he hadn't experienced since Spain. Complete tactical impotence. He'd fought Hurricanes, Curtiss fighters, even the obsolete Gladiator biplanes. Everything turned and died. But this machine, this impossibly nimble British fighter, defied every lesson he'd learned about air combat. "They've built a dancer," he transmitted to his wingman, frustration evident even through the crackling radio static. "Not a fighter, a bloody ballet dancer with guns." What Milders didn't know, what none of the Luftwaffe pilots circling over southern England could have comprehended that September morning, was that they were witnessing the arrival of a weapon that would systematically dismantle German air superiority. Within 18 months, the aircraft they dismissed as too delicate, too specialized, too British would dominate the skies over Europe. The Mockery would end in smoke and twisted aluminum scattered across 3 continents. The mathematics of humiliation were already written in those graceful curves. A turning radius 10% tighter than anything Germany would ever produce. A roll rate that would remain unmatched until jets arrived. 8 machine guns synchronized to create a cone of destruction that could saw a Messerschmitt in half. German engineers had pursued speed and climb rate. The British had built something that could turn inside your nightmares. The story of how British stubbornness and engineering brilliance created the Spitfire begins not in glory, but in desperate improvisation. In 1934, the Air Ministry issued Specification F.37, calling for a modern fighter to replace the biplane designs that still equipped Fighter Command. Most manufacturers proposed safe, incremental improvements. Reginald Mitchell, Supermarine's chief designer, already dying of cancer, proposed something radical. Mitchell had built racing seaplanes that won the Schneider Trophy 3 consecutive times. He understood speed, but more critically, he understood that future air combat would demand not just velocity, but agility at velocity. The design that emerged from his drawing board in 1935 looked like nothing else flying. The elliptical wing wasn't chosen for aesthetics, though it became iconic. Mitchell selected that shape because it provided the minimum drag for the maximum lift, allowing tight turns without bleeding energy. Every rivet, every curve, every structural element was optimized for one purpose: turning inside the enemy while maintaining killing speed. The prototype first flew on March 5, 1936, from Eastleigh Aerodrome near Southampton. Test pilot Geoffrey Quill climbed to 5,000 feet and pushed the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine to full power. The little fighter accelerated like a thoroughbred. Then he rolled it. Then he turned it. When he landed 20 minutes later, Quill's report was succinct. "This aircraft will change everything." He was right. But first, it had to be built in quantities large enough to matter. And that's where British determination transformed engineering elegance into strategic weapon. The first Spitfires entered service with 609th Squadron at Duxford in August 1938. There were 9 aircraft. 9. Against a Luftwaffe that already possessed nearly 4,000 combat aircraft. The pilots loved them immediately. The Air Ministry looked at production figures and quietly panicked. Supermarine's factory could build 5 Spitfires per week. At that rate, equipping Fighter Command would take years they didn't have. Lord Beaverbrook, appointed Minister of Aircraft Production in May 1940, with France collapsing and invasion imminent, attacked the production problem with characteristic ruthlessness. "I don't care if you have to build them in garden sheds," he told industrialists. "Build more Spitfires." They did, nearly. Castle Bromwich, a massive shadow factory near Birmingham, began operations in June 1940. Within months, it was producing 300 Spitfires monthly. Small workshops across southern England manufactured components. A Spitfire's fuselage contained 22,000 rivets. Women workers, many who'd never seen an aircraft before, learned to drive rivets with precision measured in thousandths of an inch. They called themselves Spitfire Girls. Their work was measured in German aircraft that never returned home. By July 1940, As the Luftwaffe prepared to destroy Fighter Command as prelude to invasion, production had reached barely 400 Spitfires operational. The Germans deployed nearly 3,000 fighters and bombers. The mathematics suggested annihilation. German intelligence certainly thought so. Their briefings described the Spitfire as excellent but rare, expected to be eliminated in the campaign's opening weeks. They were counting on Hurricane squadrons bearing the defensive burden. They were half right. Hurricanes did bear the burden, shooting down more German aircraft overall simply because there were more of them. But the Spitfire did something more important. It created doubt. July 19th. 1940. Flight Lieutenant Alfred Deer of 54 Squadron was climbing through 8,000 feet when he spotted the formation. 9 Messerschmitt 109 E3s, the Luftwaffe's best fighter, coming in from the channel at 12,000 feet. They hadn't seen him yet. Deer, a New Zealander who'd been flying Spitfires for 18 months, understood what many of his comrades were still learning. The Spitfire couldn't outdive the 109. It couldn't outrun it in level flight, but it could turn inside it, and that made all the difference. He climbed to 13,000 feet, positioning himself between the Germans and the sun. When he rolled into his attack, the Messerschmitt scattered. Standard Luftwaffe tactic perfected over Poland and France. Dive away using superior speed, then climb back for another pass. Deer picked the slowest to react and followed him down. At 400 miles per hour, his Spitfire was shaking, the controls growing heavy. The Messerschmitt was pulling away. Then its pilot made the mistake German pilots would make 1,000 times that summer. He tried to turn to engage. Deer pulled his Spitfire into a banking turn that would have torn the wings off a Messerschmitt. The German pilot saw the British fighter turning inside his arc and tried desperately to tighten his turn. His aircraft stalled, snap rolled, and fell away trailing smoke. Deer didn't see him crash. He was already engaging the next target. The entire fight lasted 3 minutes. When it ended, 2 Messerschmitts were falling toward the channel. Deer's Spitfire had 3 bullet holes. He landed at Hornchurch, had the holes patched, and was airborne again within the hour. That evening, Luftwaffe intelligence officers at Pas-de-Calais interviewed the surviving German pilots. Their reports were consistent and troubling. The British fighter turned impossibly tight. One pilot, Unteroffizier Hans Eckehard Bob, wrote in his diary, "We thought we understood air combat. This British machine has rewritten the rules." The Mockery was beginning to fade. By August, it would be replaced by fear. To understand why the Spitfire dominated, you must understand the physics of aerial combat. In 1940, fighter tactics revolved around positioning. Get above your enemy, dive, fire, climb away. Simple. Effective, unless your enemy could turn inside your attack and put you in their gun sight before you could escape. The Spitfire's elliptical wing was an engineering masterpiece. The shape distributed lift evenly across the entire wingspan, reducing induced drag during turns. Less drag meant tighter turns without losing speed. But that was only part of the equation. The wing loading, the aircraft's weight divided by wing area, was lower than the Messerschmitt 109's. This meant the Spitfire needed less speed to generate the same lift. In practical terms, a Spitfire could turn at 220 miles per hour, where a Messerschmitt needed 240. Those 20 miles per hour meant the difference between shooting and being shot. German pilots discovered this the hard way. Oberleutnant Julius Neumann, a veteran with 12 victories, encountered his first Spitfire on August 13, 1940. His after-action report, preserved in Luftwaffe archives, reads like a confession. "I attacked from above as doctrine demands. The British pilot saw me and turned. I followed, confident in my aircraft's superiority. He turned tighter. I pulled harder on the stick. My aircraft shuddered, approached stall. The British fighter continued turning, impossibly tight, until he was on my tail. I heard his machine guns, felt impacts on my aircraft. Only by diving away at full power did I escape. This was not the combat we trained for." The technical specifications tell part of the story. The Spitfire Mark I could sustain a turn radius of 800 feet at 220 miles per hour. The Messerschmitt 109E needed 1,000 feet at 240 miles per hour. That 200-foot difference was a killing zone, but numbers alone don't explain dominance. The Spitfire's controls remained light and responsive even at high speeds, where the Messerschmitts became heavy and sluggish. Pilots described the Spitfire as an extension of their body. You thought about turning, and it turned. The 109 required muscle, planning, and perfect technique. Squadron leader Brian Lane of 19 Squadron described it perfectly in his memoir. The Messerschmitt is a racing car. Faster in a straight line, brutal acceleration. The Spitfire is a dancer. It flows through the sky. When you need to turn right now, instantly, to survive, the Spitfire turns. The Messerschmitt thinks about it. This advantage manifested in combat repeatedly. German formations flying disciplined attacks would disintegrate the moment Spitfires engaged. The rigid Luftwaffe tactics, perfected against inferior aircraft, became death sentences against an opponent who could turn inside every maneuver. August 13, 1940. The Luftwaffe called it Adlertag, Eagle Day, the day they would destroy Fighter Command. They launched 1,300 sorties against British airfields and radar stations. Hermann Göring, Luftwaffe commander and one of Hitler's closest confidants, predicted victory within 4 weeks. By nightfall, the Germans had lost 45 aircraft. Fighter Command lost 13. Of those losses, the Spitfire squadrons accounted for 31 German aircraft destroyed while losing only 6 of their own, a kill ratio of better than 5-1. The pattern repeated daily. German bombers, escorted by fighters that should have guaranteed their safety, returned home in shattered formations. The Spitfire squadrons, outnumbered 3-1, were destroying German aircraft faster than factories could replace them. Pilot officer Jeffrey Wellham, 19 years old and flying with 92 Squadron, shot down his first Messerschmitt on August 15th. His combat report, filed at Biggin Hill that evening, captured the systematic nature of Spitfire superiority. Engaged enemy aircraft at 15,000 feet over Canterbury. Enemy attempted to dive away. I followed and closed to 200 yards. Enemy then turned hard left. I turned inside him easily. Fired a 2-second burst. Enemy aircraft exploded. Total engagement time, 18 seconds. 18 seconds from engagement to kill. That was becoming standard for experienced Spitfire pilots. The Germans called these pilots Experten, experts who could exploit their aircraft's characteristics perfectly. The British had something better. They had an aircraft that made average pilots deadly and expert pilots unstoppable. Flight Lieutenant Bob Stanford Tuck of 92 Squadron became one of Fighter Command's top scorers that summer. In September alone, he destroyed 11 German aircraft. His technique was simple. Wait for the German to maneuver, turn inside him, fire. One pilot, Hauptmann Horst Tietzen, survived an encounter with Tuck and later described it to interrogators. This Tuck, he is called by his men. He waits like a snake. We attacked a bomber formation. I saw him climbing below us. I rolled to engage. He turned, impossibly tight. My aircraft cannot match this. I fired, missed. He fired. My aircraft, she came apart. I bailed out. This man, in this machine, he is death. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe fighter pilots was profound. They'd come to England expecting to sweep aside an exhausted inferior force. Instead, they faced an aircraft that could turn inside anything they flew, and pilots who used that advantage ruthlessly. German losses mounted. By early September, the Luftwaffe had lost over 600 aircraft. Fighter Command had lost 260, and most pilots were recovered to fly again. Göring, watching his Air Force bleed, demanded explanations. The answer came back repeatedly. The Spitfire. September 15, 1940, now commemorated as Battle of Britain Day. The Luftwaffe launched its largest daylight raid, attempting to destroy Fighter Command in one overwhelming blow. 2 waves, nearly 400 bombers with fighter escort, targeting London and southern airfields. Fighter Command launched every available squadron. Spitfires from 11 Group climbed to intercept. What followed was the largest air battle in history to that date. Squadron leader Douglas Bader, leading the Duxford Wing with 5 squadrons, including 3 equipped with Spitfires, engaged the first wave over the Thames estuary. His tactical report, filed that evening, described systematic slaughter. Enemy formation sighted at 22,000 feet, estimated 200 aircraft. We attacked from above and ahead. Spitfires of 242 Squadron engaged escort fighters. We observed at least 15 enemy aircraft destroyed in first pass. Enemy formation broke up. Individual combats across the entire sector. My personal score, 2 Dorniers destroyed, 1 Messerschmitt damaged. By day's end, the Luftwaffe had lost 56 aircraft. Fighter Command lost 29. But critically, most British pilots survived to fight again. The Germans were losing irreplaceable veterans. The British were learning and improving. That night, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, indefinitely. The Luftwaffe couldn't achieve air superiority. Without control of the skies, invasion was suicide. And they couldn't achieve air superiority because they couldn't defeat the Spitfire. The Spitfire that dominated the Battle of Britain was just the beginning. What made the design truly remarkable was its capacity for evolution. Reginald Mitchell had created a platform that could absorb continuous improvement without losing its essential characteristics. The Mark I, powered by the Merlin III engine producing 1,030 horsepower, gave way to the Mark II with the Merlin XII at 1,175 horsepower. Then the Mark V with the Merlin 45 producing 140 horsepower. Each improvement came in response to German developments. When the Focke-Wulf 190 appeared in late 1941 with performance superior to early Spitfires, the British responded with the Mark IX. Powered by the Merlin 61 with two-stage supercharging, it restored British superiority at all altitudes. German pilots who thought they finally had the advantage discovered otherwise. Oberfeldwebel Heinz Knoke, flying Focke-Wulf 190s with Jagdgeschwader 11, encountered Mark IXs over the Ruhr in July 1942. His diary entry that night was bitter. "We thought our new fighters would dominate. Today I learned otherwise. The British have improved their Spitfire. It climbs faster than our Focke-Wulf. It turns tighter. At 6,000 meters, it is faster. They will not let us win. Every time we improve, they improve more." This constant evolution drove German engineers to distraction. They would analyze captured Spitfires, understand its advantages, design counters. By the time those counters reached operational units, the Spitfire had evolved again. The Mark IX, introduced in mid-1942, could reach 43,000 feet operationally, higher than any German fighter. Its maximum speed of 408 miles per hour at 28,000 feet exceeded anything in the Luftwaffe inventory. Most critically, it retained the turning ability that made the Spitfire deadly. But raw performance was only part of the evolution. British engineers continuously improved weapons, ammunition capacity, armor protection, and operational systems. The Mark IX carried two 20mm cannon and 4 machine guns, giving it hitting power equal to German fighters while maintaining superior ammunition capacity. Test pilot Geoffrey Quill, who flew every Spitfire variant, later wrote, "Each Mark was better than the last, but each retained the essential Spitfire characteristics. Light controls, beautiful handling, deadly in the turn. The Germans kept trying to beat us with horsepower and firepower. We kept winning with agility and pilot skill." March 1942. The island of Malta, tiny. British possession in the Mediterranean was under siege. German and Italian aircraft launched up to 300 raids daily, attempting to bomb the island into submission. If Malta fell, the Mediterranean would become an Axis lake, cutting Allied supply lines to North Africa and the Middle East. The island's defenders had 7 serviceable Hurricane fighters. Against 300 daily attackers, survival seemed impossible. Then, on March 7th, 15 Spitfire Mark Vs arrived, flown off HMS Eagle's flight deck. The Germans weren't concerned. 15 fighters, even Spitfires, couldn't change the mathematics. They were wrong. Flight Lieutenant James McLaughlin, a South African pilot who'd lost his left arm in combat but convinced his superiors to let him fly with an artificial limb, led the first Malta Spitfire patrol on March 10th. They encountered 58 German bombers escorted by 30 Messerschmitt 109s. McLaughlin's combat report filed that evening was matter-of-fact. Engaged enemy formation over Grand Harbor, our 15 Spitfires against approximately 90 enemy aircraft, destroyed 2 Junkers 88s personally. Squadron claimed 12 destroyed, 4 probable. We lost no aircraft. Enemy formation abandoned attack and returned to Sicily. The Germans couldn't believe it. 15 fighters had broken up an attack by 90 aircraft. They tried again the next day. Same result. And the day after that. Wing Commander E.J. Gracie, commanding Malta's fighter defenses, understood what was happening. The Spitfire's turning ability allows us to multiply our effectiveness. One Spitfire engaging a bomber formation can force the entire formation to break up. Once they're scattered, they're vulnerable. The Germans simply cannot accept the losses we're inflicting. By April, with reinforcements bringing Malta's Spitfire strength to 47 aircraft, the Germans changed tactics. They tried fighter sweeps, attempting to destroy the Spitfires in air-to-air combat. This played directly to British strengths. Pilot Officer Hugh Puget-Lloyd shot down 5 Messerschmitt 109s in a single sortie on April 17th. His technique, described in a letter home, was pure Spitfire tactics. They came in at 20,000 feet, 30 fighters attempting to lure us into combat. We climbed to 25,000 and waited. When they turned to engage, we dove through them, each pilot selecting a target. I got on the tail of one Jerry. He tried to turn. I turned inside him. He tried to dive. I followed. He tried everything his training taught him. None of it worked. At 300 yards, I fired. He exploded. I climbed back for the next one. Lloyd would destroy 3 more that day before running out of ammunition. The siege of Malta continued until November 1942, but the air battle was decided by May. The Germans couldn't sustain their losses. The Spitfire had defended the indefensible. Post-war analysis showed that Malta's Spitfire squadrons destroyed over 300 German and Italian aircraft between March and November 1942. They lost 87 Spitfires, but only 31 pilots were killed or captured. The others were recovered from the sea or crash-landed on the tiny island. Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, German commander in the Mediterranean, wrote in his memoirs, "Malta's Spitfires defeated us. We had numerical superiority, better bases, more resources, but we couldn't defeat that aircraft. It turned our tactical advantages into liabilities. Every attack became a calculated risk. Eventually, the losses became unsustainable." While Malta's drama unfolded, another desperate battle was brewing half a world away. Darwin, Australia's northern gateway, faced relentless Japanese attacks. The same carrier aircraft that had devastated Pearl Harbor now pounded Darwin daily. Australia's air defenses were inadequate. Obsolete Wirraways and a handful of worn-out Hurricanes faced superior Japanese Zeros. The mathematics suggested Darwin would fall. Then, in January 1943, the first Spitfire Mark Vs arrived aboard HMS Indomitable. No. 452 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force began operations from Darwin on February 1, 1943. The Japanese, confident in their Zero superiority, launched a raid that day with 27 bombers and 18 fighters. They expected the usual results. Flight Lieutenant Robert Foster led the first intercept with 8 Spitfires. The Japanese formation never reached Darwin. Foster's combat report stunned Japanese intelligence when they captured it months later. Engaged enemy formation 50 miles north of Darwin at 18,000 feet. Japanese fighters attempted to engage. We turned inside their attacks repeatedly. Their aircraft is nimble but slow. Our Spitfires were faster and more maneuverable. Destroyed 3 enemy fighters personally. Squadron claimed 9 destroyed, 3 probable. No losses. The Japanese couldn't accept this. Their Zero, undefeated across the Pacific, had met its match. They tried again the next day with double the fighters. Same result. Squadron leader Clive Caldwell, Australia's top ace, understood the Zero's reputation. He also understood the Spitfire's advantages. The Zero turns beautifully at low speed, but at combat speeds above 300 miles per hour, the Spitfire outturns it. The Zero's light construction becomes a liability. Our Spitfire can absorb punishment and keep fighting. This proved true repeatedly. Warrant Officer Yoshihiko Nakamura survived an encounter with Caldwell on March 15th. His after-action report, discovered in Japanese archives after the war, described systematic defeat. The British fighter is faster than our Zero at all altitudes. When I attempted to turn with him, he turned inside my circle despite his larger size. I fired, observed hits on his aircraft. He continued fighting. When I attempted to disengage, he followed and destroyed my wingman. Only by diving to wave-top height and flying through clouds did I escape. This aircraft, it dominates our Zero in every aspect except perhaps initial turn rate below 250 kilometers per hour. By April 1943, Japanese raids on Darwin had stopped. The Spitfires had made attacks too costly. Australian and British pilots had destroyed over 40 Japanese aircraft in 3 months while losing 7 Spitfires and 3 pilots. The psychological impact rippled across the Pacific. If the invincible Zero could be defeated, Japanese air superiority was myth, not fact. American pilots preparing to receive their own improved fighters took notice. The British had shown it could be done. One of history's lesser-known chapters involves Spitfires fighting in Soviet colors. Between 1942 and 1944, Britain delivered over 1,300 Spitfires to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease. Soviet pilots, accustomed to rugged but unsophisticated aircraft, discovered the Spitfire's qualities. Lieutenant Colonel Pavel Golovachev, commanding the 57th Guards Fighter Regiment equipped with Spitfire Mark 9s, wrote to a British liaison officer in August 1943. Your Spitfire is a revelation. It combines qualities we thought impossible: speed of our Yak 3, turning ability of our Lag 3, durability beyond anything we possess. My pilots call it the British ballerina with iron fists. Yesterday, we engaged a formation of Messerschmitt 109s over Smolensk. 8 Spitfires against 19 German fighters. We destroyed 7 confirmed, damaged 4 others, lost no aircraft. The Germans cannot compete. Soviet combat reports confirm the Spitfire's effectiveness. Between December 1942 and May 1945, Soviet Spitfire units claimed over 1,000 German aircraft destroyed. The actual number was likely lower, as overclaiming was common on all sides. But even conservative analysis suggests Soviet Spitfires achieved kill ratios exceeding 4-to-1. What impressed Soviet pilots most was reliability. Major Anatoly Kuznetsov, who flew both Soviet and British fighters, compared them bluntly. Our aircraft are weapons, crude, effective, cheap to produce. The Spitfire is a precision instrument. Everything works as designed. The engine runs smoothly. The controls respond perfectly. The guns never jam. In winter, when our aircraft freeze and fail to start, the Spitfire starts first time. British engineering is exceptional. German pilots on the Eastern Front learned to identify Spitfires by their behavior. Where Soviet fighters typically attacked aggressively but predictably, Spitfire units employed sophisticated tactics. They covered each other, used altitude advantages, and turned inside German fighters attempting to engage. Hauptmann Günther Roll, commanding Jagdgeschwader 52, and ultimately credited with 275 victories, encountered Soviet Spitfires in October 1943. His after-action report noted, "These are not typical Soviet pilots. They employ British tactics, use their aircraft's turning ability expertly. Engaging Spitfire units requires the same caution as fighting over England. The aircraft gives them significant advantages." The Spitfire's presence on the Eastern Front had strategic implications beyond simple kill ratios. Luftwaffe units had to maintain tactical flexibility, never knowing whether they'd face crude Soviet aircraft or sophisticated British fighters. This uncertainty complicated planning and forced German pilots to treat every engagement as potentially lethal. In late 1943, Rolls-Royce delivered a new engine that would transform the Spitfire into its ultimate form. The Griffin 65, developing over 2,000 horsepower, was 50% more powerful than the original Merlin. Installing this monster in a Spitfire airframe created the Mark 14, an aircraft that redefined fighter performance. Maximum speed exceeded 446 miles per hour at 26,000 feet. Climb rate reached 4,900 feet per minute. Service ceiling exceeded 44,000 feet. But most remarkably, despite increased power and weight, the Mark 14 retained the Spitfire's legendary turning ability. German pilots discovered this the hard way. Flight Lieutenant John Plagius, flying with 610 Squadron, shot down 3 Messerschmitt 109 Gustavs in a single sortie on March 2, 1944. His combat report described systematic dominance. Engaged enemy fighters at 28,000 feet over France. The new Gustav is fast, well-armed, but my Mark 14 is faster, climbs better, and turns tighter. First engagement. Enemy dived away. I followed, caught him, destroyed him at 440 miles per hour. Second engagement. Enemy tried to turn. I turned inside him easily despite our speed. He stalled trying to match my turn. I destroyed him before he recovered. Third engagement. Enemy attempted to escape by climbing. My aircraft outclimbed him, destroyed him at 35,000 feet. Total engagement time, 4 minutes. 4 minutes. 3 German fighters destroyed. The Mark 14 wasn't just better than German fighters. It made them obsolete. German test pilot Hans Werner Lerche, who flew captured Spitfire, Mark 14s after the war, provided objective analysis in his technical report to Allied intelligence. This aircraft represents the pinnacle of piston fighter development. Performance exceeds our best aircraft in every measurable category: speed, climb, ceiling, acceleration. But most impressive is handling. Despite 2,000 horsepower, the aircraft remains docile and responsive. Our high-powered fighters, the Focke-Wulf 190 Dora 9 and the Messerschmitt 109 Gustav, become handful at full power. The Spitfire remains a lady, a very fast, very deadly lady. The Mark 14 arrived too late to significantly impact European air wars' outcome. By 1944, Allied air superiority was assured by sheer numbers across all types. But in the Pacific and Burma theaters, where Japanese fighters remained formidable, the Mark 14 proved devastating. Wing Commander Duncan Smith, leading Spitfire, Mark 14s with No. 17 Squadron over Burma in early 1945, destroyed 7 Japanese aircraft in 3 weeks. His tactical summary noted, "The Japanese Oscar and Frank fighters are nimble and well flown. Our Spitfire is simply better, faster, climbs better, dives better, turns equally well at combat speeds. There is no phase of combat where they have advantage." When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Spitfires had been in front-line service for 6 years and 9 months. No other fighter served as long while remaining competitive throughout. Total production exceeded 20,200 aircraft across 24 major variants. From the Mark 1's 1,030 horsepower Merlin III to the Mark 24's 2,050 horsepower Griffin 64, the evolution was continuous, but the essential character remained unchanged. Combat statistics tell the story of dominance. Royal Air Force records credit Spitfire pilots with approximately 15,000 German and Italian aircraft destroyed. Losses were approximately 4,000 Spitfires in combat, a kill ratio approaching 4-to-1 sustained across 6 years of continuous fighting. But numbers alone don't capture the Spitfire's impact. It created psychological dominance. German pilots who'd conquered Poland, France, and half of Russia learned fear over England. The Luftwaffe, which began the war expecting air supremacy, ended it unable to contest British skies. Werner Milders, the pilot who'd called the Spitfire a dancer in September 1940, was killed in a flying accident in November 1941. But his assessment lived on in Luftwaffe folklore. German pilots developed grudging respect that bordered on admiration for the aircraft that had defeated them. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, who survived the war with 176 victories and eventually became chief of the post-war West German Air Force, spoke at a 1985 reunion of Battle of Britain veterans. "We Germans built good fighters, fast, heavily armed, robust. But you British built the perfect fighter. The Spitfire defeated us not through overwhelming numbers, though eventually you had those too. It defeated us through being simply better. Better design, better handling, better suited to combat realities. Every time we thought we'd equaled it, you improved it. This was engineering excellence combined with pilot skill. We could not overcome that combination." German ace Adolf Galland, who ended the war as commander of Germany's jet fighter forces, was more blunt in his 1956 memoir. "The Spitfire was our nightmare. Fast enough we couldn't run. Maneuverable enough we couldn't fight. Produced in such numbers we couldn't win through attrition. If I could have chosen any fighter for my pilots, I would have chosen the Spitfire. That it fought against us was our misfortune." The Spitfire's dominance stemmed from Reginald Mitchell's original design genius and continuous refinement by teams of engineers who understood fighter combat. Every component was optimized for its role. The elliptical wing provided maximum lift with minimum drag. The thin cross-section reduced drag at high speed. The structure was strong enough to tolerate violent maneuvers while light enough to maintain agility. Wing loading remained optimal across all variants despite increasing weight and power. The Rolls-Royce Merlin and later Griffin engines were masterpieces of mechanical engineering. Supercharging systems maintained power at altitude. Reliability was exceptional by wartime standards. Maintenance was straightforward, allowing rapid turnaround between sorties. The control system, using traditional cables and pulleys rather than push rods, provided feedback that pilots learned to interpret instinctively. You could feel the aircraft through the controls, understanding its limits without conscious thought. Armament evolved from 8 machine guns to 2 cannon and 4 machine guns to 4 cannon in late war variants. Each configuration provided devastating firepower while maintaining acceptable ammunition loads. The cockpit was laid out logically. Critical instruments were grouped centrally. Controls fell naturally to hand. Visibility was excellent. The bubble canopy introduced on the Mark 8, providing unobstructed views in all directions. Even small details mattered. The retractable tail wheel reduced drag. The wide-track undercarriage prevented ground loops. The metal stressed skin construction tolerated battle damage that would destroy fabric-covered fighters. Everything worked together. No single feature made the Spitfire dominant. The integration of hundreds of design decisions, each made correctly, created a weapon system that exceeded the sum of its parts. Test pilot Alex Henshaw, who flew more Spitfires than any other pilot while delivering them from factories to squadrons, later wrote, "I flew 10,044 different Spitfires during the war. Everyone was slightly different, yet everyone was unmistakably a Spitfire. The feel, the response, the confidence it inspired. You climbed into a Spitfire knowing it would not let you down. That trust between pilot and machine was the secret weapon German engineers never understood." September 15th, 1945, almost exactly 5 years after Battle of Britain Day. Flight Lieutenant Pierre Klosterman, a free French pilot serving with the RAF, flew his final Spitfire, Sortie. The war was over. He'd flown Spitfires since 1943, destroying 33 German aircraft. Landing at Lübeck in occupied Germany, Klosterman taxied past rows of captured Luftwaffe fighters, Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs, even a few early jets. All defeated, all silent. He shut down his Spitfire's Merlin engine and sat quietly for a moment. "I thought about all the German pilots who died trying to shoot down Spitfires," he wrote in his memoir. "Young men like me, fighting for a terrible cause, but brave nonetheless. They'd mocked us in 1940, called our fighters beautiful but weak. By 1945, they knew better. The Spitfire had rewritten the rules of air combat. Every fighter since has tried to match what Reginald Mitchell created on a drawing board in 1935. The Mockery had ended in fire and destruction across 3 continents. German pilots who survived learned respect the hard way. Those who didn't became statistics in a one-sided massacre that masqueraded as aerial combat. The Spitfire proved that engineering excellence, continuously refined, creates lasting advantage. Germany built faster fighters, more heavily armed fighters, eventually even jet fighters. None could defeat properly flown Spitfires piloted by competent aviators. Speed and firepower couldn't overcome fundamental design superiority. British determination transformed Mitchell's vision into mass-produced reality. 20,000 Spitfires, each one a precision instrument, each one capable of dominating anything Germany produced. The factory workers, mostly women, built them faster than the Luftwaffe could destroy them. The pilots, drawn from Britain, the Commonwealth, and occupied Europe, learned to exploit every advantage the design provided. The Germans had laughed at the graceful British fighter in September 1940. By May 1945, there were no Germans left to laugh. The Spitfire had swept them from the skies. Today, fewer than 70 Spitfires remain airworthy. Each one is priceless, maintained by devoted engineers using original techniques and specifications. When a Spitfire flies at an air show, crowds fall silent. The distinctive sound of a Merlin engine at full power, the elliptical wings banking against blue sky, triggers something primal in British hearts. This aircraft saved Britain when invasion seemed inevitable. It defended Malta when the Mediterranean seemed lost. It fought from Darwin to Murmansk, from Burma to Belgium. Every theater of war saw Spitfires, and everywhere they flew, they dominated. The engineering principles Mitchell pioneered, distributed lift loading, optimal wing design, integration of power and control, inform fighter design to this day. Modern fighters are faster, more heavily armed, packed with electronics. But they still turn, climb, and fight using principles the Spitfire demonstrated 85 years ago. German pilots who survived the war carried memories of the Spitfire to their graves. Respect mixed with fear, admiration tinged with bitter recognition of defeat. They'd flown good aircraft, sometimes excellent aircraft, but they'd faced the perfect aircraft. The Mockery ended when the first Messerschmitt tried to turn with a Spitfire and found itself in someone's gun sight instead. It ended when Spitfires defended Britain despite impossible odds. It ended when every new German fighter was measured against Spitfire performance and found wanting. It ended ultimately in the complete destruction of the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force. The Spitfire didn't do this alone. Allied numbers, American production, strategic bombing all contributed. But the Spitfire was there from first day to last, always competitive, often dominant, never defeated. In the end, that was the answer to German mockery. Not words, but results. Not propaganda, but performance. Not boasts, but bodies. German pilots fell from English skies in 1940, from Maltese skies in 1942, from French skies in 1944. Everywhere the Spitfire flew, Germans died. The Mockery ended in fire and aluminum rain. It ended in parachutes drifting down over Kent. It ended in oil slicks on the Mediterranean. It ended in burning wrecks scattered across French fields. It ended finally and completely in May 1945, when the last Luftwaffe fighter surrendered to an enemy who flew Spitfires. Werner Milders had called it a dancer. He was right, but he failed to understand what that meant. Dancers are graceful, beautiful, seemingly delicate. They're also incredibly strong, perfectly balanced, and capable of movements others cannot match. The Spitfire danced through German formations. It danced away from cannon shells. It danced into perfect firing position behind aircraft that couldn't turn quickly enough. And when the dance ended, Germans fell. That was how British engineering ended German mockery. Not with words, but with wings. Not with promises, but with performance. Not with threats, but with the most perfect fighter of the Second World War, doing what it was designed to do, turning inside the enemy, firing, and watching them fall. The Spitfire, the aircraft that defeated the Luftwaffe and ended German laughter forever.